It is December 23rd, only 2 days until Christmas. I hope that you have been enjoying this Christmas season with your family. Whether you've done the Advent bingo activities that we sent, or the Nativity escape room, or maybe you got out yesterday and got to see the Christmas star in the sky. There have been a lot of exciting things happening this Christmas season to remind us Jesus' birth, the whole reason we celebrate Christmas. And so I hope you've been enjoying that time with your families. And I would like to finish up the Christmas story that we have been going through the book of Wintry Night. We are ready for the last two chapters, chapters 10 and 11. And chapter 10 is the first Christmas. What if we had lived in Bethlehem at the time Jesus was born? Our story might have been like that of a boy named Aaron and his little sister Anna. They loved all the excitement in this normally sleepy town. There was something going on everywhere they looked. And the people! They had never seen so many people. Out on the narrow, crowded street, dusty men tugged and shouted at heavily laden donkeys. Aaron grinned to himself as he watched the sweat make stripes on their faces. Women with tiny children were everywhere. Older children were lugging bundles of food. Everyone looked weary, since the only reason they had come here was to pay unfair taxes. Aaron and Anna's favorite place was the city gate. Late one afternoon, they climbed up onto the sun-warmed wall to watch strangers come into town. Alone and in groups, the people arrived, some walking rapidly on this last bit of their journey. An old man at the gate said a few of the travelers were from as far away as Nazareth. Aaron could hardly believe it. They must have spent 4 or 5 nights sleeping beside the road. The afternoon sun felt good on Aaron and Anna's backs, for the air was a little chilly. Anna became sleepy and closed her eyes. Minutes later, Aaron nudged her, and she awoke. 2 people were coming up the dusty road in the valley. A man walking and a woman riding a donkey. They traveled so slowly. The woman had her hand on the man's shoulder, and she seemed very tired. The man kept looking at her anxiously. As the couple drew closer, Aaron and Anna could see that their donkey was covered with dust. They had come a long way. But why did they stop so often when their trip was almost over? They paused again, right in front of the gate. The woman looked up at the children and smiled. Their hearts filled with wonder. The young woman's face, her eyes, great pools of darkness, was pale with exhaustion. But it held a tender smile that made the children forget taxes and Roman soldiers and even Caesar Augustus himself. In hot, noisy, crowded Bethlehem, her smile seemed to say, all the joy in heaven came down to earth. That night, wrapped up in his cloak, Aaron couldn't sleep. All he could think of was that smile, that incredible smile. It was unusual those days to see a happy face, much less a beautiful smile. He wondered if the man and woman had found a place to sleep. Aaron stirred restlessly. He somehow knew this was a special night. Something wonderful, he sensed, was about to happen. Something so wonderful, he was almost afraid to breathe. Bethlehem was very still. On other evenings, donkeys brayed in their stables and wolves howled from the hilltops. But even the donkeys and wolves were quiet. The wind itself had stopped blowing. It was as if the whole world was listening, waiting. Late, very late, there was a commotion outside. Men were shouting and running, their sandals scuffing on the dirt. Aaron poked Anna, his finger on his lips. Quietly, the children jumped to their feet and ran to the door. They stared at the men, talking so loudly in the middle of the night. Not only their shaggy hair and ragged robes, but also their smell marked them as shepherds. Probably the outcast shepherds who kept watch over the sheep outside Bethlehem, the sheep chosen for the temple sacrifices. But what were they saying? They had seen an angel? Aaron looked at them again to make sure they were really shepherds and not crazy people. "We saw an angel," they repeated. "And the angel told us about a baby being born in Bethlehem, a baby called Savior and Lord." They had just seen the baby with their own eyes. He was in a cave that the innkeeper used for a stable. Aaron didn't wait to hear more. Grabbing Anna's hand, he took off down the street as fast as he could run. Anna's short legs could hardly keep up with his longer ones. They ran past houses where drowsy people stumbled to the door to see what all the racket was about. Panting, they finally reached the cave and peered in. There she was, the woman with the radiant smile. She was lying on soft hay, piled beside one of the stalls. Her eyes were closed, but her peaceful smile filled the cave with wonder. The man knelt by her side and covered her gently with his cloak. And next to them, in the feeding trough for the cows, lay the baby. He seemed so tiny, wrapped tight in a long linen band and sleeping soundly like any other baby. He slept as though the world had not waited thousands of years for that moment, as though Aaron and Anna's lives and those of everyone on earth were not wrapped up in his birth, as though all the sin and sorrow of the world was not his concern. Aaron wondered if he dared speak to the young mother, but he didn't want to disturb her. He wanted to ask her if he could touch the baby, not to wake him, but just to touch him. Then Aaron looked at his own grubby hands. He couldn't remember when he had last washed them, so he tucked them behind his back and just looked. Aaron glanced at Anna. Little Anna was on her knees, her hands clasped together, a look of surprise and joy on her face. Tears were trickling down her grimy little cheeks. Aaron knelt beside her. Chapter 11. It is finished. Zeb sat still for a while, staring at the Christmas tree. Then he spoke quietly. "Ma'am, what I don't get is how a baby could save a world. Can you explain that?" "Good question," the woman replied. "You've probably heard some wonderful stories about Jesus' life, the parables he told and the miracles he performed. But it's what happened at the end of his life that matters most. Let's pick up the story of Aaron and Anna. After they had grown up, it's Passover time in Jerusalem." "The same Passover they did in Egypt?" Zeb asked. "Yes," the woman replied. "They were celebrating how God had delivered them from Egypt. But this Passover was the most important of all, as you will soon see." Having heard about Jesus all their lives, Aaron and Anna could not believe the news of his arrest. They, like many others, believed Jesus would rescue them from the Romans. Now Jesus was sentenced to die. On that day, crowds began gathering on the hill called the Place of the Skull. Aaron studied the people. The hardened soldiers, used to suffering and death, sat and gambled. The arrogant centurion in charge stood near them, efficient and unfeeling. The mocking scribes and Pharisees were there too, but most of the people were just curious onlookers who had come to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. Anna spotted a small group off to one side near the center cross. Something about one of the women drew her attention. The woman looked up, and the sun shone straight on her face. Anna tugged Aaron's sleeve. The woman was older now, but there was no mistaking, even at this distance. She was the mother they had seen in the cave. How long they stood there, Aaron never knew. He felt in some way that he himself was dying. Everything was growing dark, darker, till it was black as midnight. The earth began to shake. Aaron gripped Anna's arm. After a while, the shaking stopped, but the darkness lingered for 3 long hours. The scoffers stopped scoffing. The crowds grew quiet. And in that awful stillness, a single loud cry arose. My God, why have you forsaken me?" No answer. Only silence. Then the same voice exclaiming, "It is finished." The figure on the cross slumped. Aaron drew in his breath as Anna sobbed. But somehow they couldn't bear to leave. In the strangely dim light, a well-dressed man came with some soldiers to take Jesus' body down from the cross. They put him in a tomb in a nearby garden and rolled a huge stone across the entrance. Wordlessly, Aaron and Anna made their way home. The boy sat gazing thoughtfully into the fireplace. "That just naturally ain't right. Sounds like he didn't rescue no one, just up and died." "I know it sounds that way," the woman said, and the following day must have been one of the saddest in history. All Jesus' followers hid for fear of the Jewish leaders. His friends had believed Jesus was the one who would free them from the Romans. Now they were frightened and disappointed. But the next morning, something happened. Before dawn, a great earthquake shook the land. The angel of the Lord descended like lightning, his clothes white as snow. Ignoring the Roman guards, he tossed back the huge stone and calmly sat on it. The soldiers shook with terror and fell like dead men. 2 of the women who had followed Jesus came at dawn and found the tomb empty. They clutched each other in fear. "Don't be afraid," the angel said. "Jesus is risen. Now go and tell all his disciples." Jesus showed himself to all his disciples and friends like Aaron and Anna over the next few weeks in the garden, on the road to Emmaus, in the upper room where they'd been hiding, and beside the Sea of Galilee. Sitting down with them all, he told them not to blame the Jewish leaders, the Romans, or anyone else for his crucifixion. He explained how ever since the Garden of Eden, God had tried to tell people he was going to send them a Savior. And Jesus was that Savior. God did not send him to deliver them from unjust rulers, from illness, or unpleasant situations. He was born to die for the sins of mankind. Those who were sorry for their sins, even the worst of people, could be forgiven. And they once more would know the joy of companionship with God, lost so long ago in Eden. Through his death and resurrection, the baby born that night in Bethlehem had become Lord of all. This is the real meaning of Christmas. It was still dark when Zeb awoke the next morning. He wasn't even sure he had been asleep because his head was so full of all he had heard that wintry night. He lay thinking for a long time. Climbing carefully down the steps from the high bed, he hopped over to the window and pulled back the curtain. One bright star was twinkling in the sky. It was dawn. And that's the end of our story. One thing I've been thinking about this Christmas is without Christmas, there's no Easter. And the Christmas story, the baby coming, is one of the key components of our faith and what we believe. And so I hope you can reflect on that with your families and have a Merry, Merry Christmas.